July 11th, 2010. Andres Iniesta's extra-time winner gave Spain their first ever World Cup. To the world, it looked like the beginning of a new football dynasty, but the reality couldn't have been more different. 4 years later, the defending champions crashed out in the group stage. In 2018, host Russia eliminated them in the round of 16. Then in 2022, Morocco repeated the story, knocking Spain out at the very same stage. The kings of world football had become a team that simply couldn't survive the knockout rounds. But then came the 2026 World Cup, where they outclassed everyone. The way they dismantled France in the semi-finals will be remembered for years to come. Every opponent that stood in their way was outplayed, outworked, and outclassed. So what changed?
They've recaptured the spirit of 2010.
They hold their hand up against your throat and they stop you from breathing. That's how they play football.
With Spain having an intensity and purpose behind everything.
But their aim was to put Spanish football on a map, and it was about winning.
And Spain hasn't suffered at all throughout this tournament.
This group have written a story that will never be forgotten.
But of course, Spain have this habit of being able to drown the game down.
Welcome to Ligspo, and today we're talking about Spain's football revolution. It takes a lot of effort, time and research to bring these videos for you, so kindly hit that subscribe button. To understand Spain's rise, we first need to understand the fall of Brazil. In 2006, Brazil had everything. Ronaldinho, Ronaldo, Kaká, Roberto Carlos, Cafu. A team so stacked that every nation dreamed of having even half of their talent. Yet, when they faced France in the quarter-finals, they were completely outplayed. To many fans, it wasn't just the end of a World Cup campaign, it was the death of the beautiful game. The press said they had abandoned the Brazilian way of playing. Brazil looked predictable, congested. It wasn't the Brazil the world had fallen in love with. They had abandoned the Brazilian way of playing. But what exactly is the Brazilian way? To answer that, we need to go back to the early 1900s. Back then, football in Brazil was a sport reserved for the wealthy. White elites had proper pitches, quality equipment, coaches, and organised training. The working class had none of it. They played with worn-out footballs, or sometimes homemade ones, on crowded streets, alleyways, and empty lots. There was little room for tactics, so survival depended on skill. Since poor Brazilians were excluded from elite clubs, they created a game of their own. Those cramped spaces forced players to master close control, quick dribbles, juggling, and audacious flicks. Over time, football blended with the rhythm and creativity of Brazilian culture and samba. The result was a style the world would come to know as Joga Bonito, the beautiful game. At the time, Brazil was still searching for its place in world football, and they were yet to feature in a final of a World Cup. But everything began to change when the national team started embracing the flair and creativity of those street footballers. In 1950, Brazil reached their first ever World Cup final. They lost to Uruguay, but the direction had changed. Then came 1958. Brazil introduced a 17-year-old boy from a poor town in São Paulo state. His name was Pelé. The rest is history. Between 1958 and 1970, Brazil won 3 of the 4 World Cups, turning Joga Bonito into the most feared style of football on the planet. Brazil had become the undisputed kings of the game. For a while it seemed impossible to stop them, but by the early 2000s, the game had changed. Europe's richest clubs were signing Brazil's brightest talents at younger and younger ages. The flair came with them, but gradually it was reshaped. Individual brilliance gave way to tactical discipline. Dribbles became riskier, creativity became more restricted, and players who once defined matches on their own became pieces in a carefully engineered system. And then came the 2006 World Cup, the tournament that convinced many football fans that Joga Bonito was gone. Out of Brazil's 23-man squad, 20 players were playing their club football in Europe. They were still Brazilian by nationality, but on the pitch, they no longer played like the Brazil of old. And that's what turned one of the greatest footballing nations in history into just another contender. Brazil didn't lose its talent, it lost its identity. Spain took the opposite path. Luis de la Fuente didn't try to reinvent Spanish football. He embraced it. The same principles that brought Spain glory in 2010 were still there in 2026. Patient passing, constant movement, positional discipline, and complete control of the game's tempo. players like Pedri, Yamal and Kubasi didn't learn this style overnight. They grew up in Spain's youth academies, where this philosophy is taught from childhood until it becomes second nature. That's why, even against bigger and more physical teams like France, Spain never looked overwhelmed. They controlled the ball, dictated the rhythm, and made elite opponents chase shadows. They didn't dominate the World Cup by becoming someone else. They did it by becoming the best version of themselves. While Brazil abandoned its footballing identity, Spain protected theirs. And in the end, we see a clear difference.